The first thing I noticed wasn't the bunker. It was the silence. Not the ordinary kind you find deep in the woods where birds eventually start singing again. This silence felt deliberate, almost as if the entire forest had agreed to stop making noise. Even the wind seemed reluctant to move through the towering pine trees surrounding me. I had been hiking for almost 4 hours. The trail I originally intended to follow had disappeared behind fallen trees after a recent storm, forcing me to rely on an old topographic map I downloaded years ago. According to the map, there used to be a military observation route somewhere beyond the ridge, abandoned decades earlier after the Cold War. I wasn't looking for anything historical. I simply wanted the quickest way back to the parking area before sunset. That decision changed everything. The afternoon sky had already begun turning gray when I noticed something strange among the rocks. At first, I thought it was another boulder partially covered in moss. But unlike the natural formations surrounding it, this object had perfectly straight edges. Nature rarely creates 90-degree angles. Curiosity pulled me closer. Brushing away layers of damp vines revealed rusted steel. A massive reinforced door, half buried beneath decades of soil and vegetation. There were no warning signs, no fences, no information plaques suggesting the location had historical significance. Just a weathered military emblem barely visible beneath layers of corrosion. Whatever insignia had once identified the installation had almost completely faded away. The only thing still readable was a sequence of white letters stenciled onto the metal. B-17. Nothing else. I remember checking my phone. No signal. Not even a single bar. That wasn't unusual in remote forests, but something about seeing no service at that exact moment made the place feel even more isolated. I should have turned around. Instead, I convinced myself that abandoned military structures were probably common in this region. Maybe it had been forgotten after the government decommissioned the area decades ago. I reached for the heavy steel handle. To my surprise, the door moved. It didn't swing open easily. Instead, it groaned with a deep metallic sound that echoed through the forest, as though the bunker itself had just awakened from a very long sleep. The noise traveled farther than it should have. Then, everything became quiet again. Too quiet. I waited. Nothing happened. No animals fled. No birds reacted. The forest simply remained frozen. A cold breeze drifted out from inside the opening. It smelled different from the air outside. Not like mold. Not like wet earth. It carried the unmistakable scent of old concrete mixed with rust. And something else. Something stale. Like air trapped inside a sealed room for 50 years. I switched on my flashlight. The beam disappeared into darkness. Concrete stairs descended farther than the light could reach. Each step was covered with dust, so thick it looked untouched for decades. No footprints. No tire marks. Nothing. I hesitated. Every survival instinct told me to leave. But another thought pushed its way into my mind. If nobody had entered this bunker in years, what exactly had kept the entrance from sealing shut completely? The heavy steel door should have been impossible to move if roots and corrosion had locked it in place. Yet it had opened, almost effortlessly. I looked back toward the forest. The daylight outside already seemed dimmer than before. Clouds had swallowed the sun, making the trees appear like towering black silhouettes. For reasons I still can't explain, walking back suddenly felt more frightening than walking forward. So I stepped inside. The temperature dropped instantly. My breath became visible. The air grew so cold it felt like entering an industrial freezer. The steel door remained partially open behind me, allowing only a thin strip of daylight to reach the staircase. Each step echoed. 1, 2, 3. The sound bounced off unseen walls below before fading into complete silence. The staircase continued for nearly 30 meters before ending at another reinforced blast door. Unlike the entrance, this one was already open, only a few inches, just enough for darkness to spill through the gap. Someone had forced it open long ago. The hinges were twisted. Deep claw-like scratches covered the outer surface. I ran my fingers across one of them. The grooves weren't caused by rust. The metal had been carved away, as if something unimaginably strong had dragged its fingers across solid steel. I told myself it had probably been heavy machinery during demolition. That explanation lasted less than 10 seconds. Because then, I noticed the dust. It covered every inch of the floor, except a narrow path leading through the doorway. The trail wasn't fresh, but it wasn't ancient either. Dust had settled everywhere else. Not there. Something, or someone, had been walking through that doorway repeatedly. Not recently enough to leave sharp footprints, but often enough to prevent years of dust from accumulating. My flashlight began flickering. I slapped it against my palm. The light steadied for a moment before dimming again. I checked the batteries. Full. That made no sense. Then I heard it. A metallic sound. Far below. Clang. Like a steel door closing somewhere deep underground. I froze. The echo rolled through the bunker for several seconds before disappearing into silence. I waited. Nothing. Just as I convinced myself the structure had simply shifted with age. Another sound. Much quieter. Footsteps. Slow. Measured. Not running. Not stumbling. Walking. Somewhere beneath me. One step. Pause. Another step. Pause. Then silence. I held my breath and listened. The bunker listened back. The footsteps never came any closer. They simply stopped. I stood there in complete silence, my flashlight aimed at the narrow gap in the blast door. The beam shook slightly, not because the batteries were failing, but because my hand had started trembling without me realizing it. I waited. 10 seconds. Maybe 20. Nothing. Finally, I told myself there had to be another explanation. Old underground structures settle over time. Metal expands and contracts. Water drips through concrete. Your brain, when surrounded by absolute silence, starts turning ordinary sounds into something far more sinister. That had to be it. I pushed the blast door open. The rusted hinges let out a long, low groan before revealing a corridor stretching far into the darkness. Rows of fluorescent light fixtures lined the ceiling. Every one of them was dead. The walls were bare concrete, stained by decades of moisture. Thick electrical conduits ran along both sides of the hallway, disappearing into sealed rooms marked with faded military numbers. A03A, 05A, 07, every door was shut. Except one. Room A09 stood slightly open. Only a few inches. The same way the blast door had been. I don't know why, but I walked past it without looking inside. Something about that narrow opening felt intentional, almost as though someone wanted me to notice it. The corridor continued until it opened into an enormous chamber. It looked like a command center. Long rows of metal desks filled the room. Rotting maps still hung on one wall. Broken radio equipment covered another. Dozens of filing cabinets stood open, their contents scattered across the floor. It was as if everyone had left in a hurry. One chair had been knocked over. Coffee mugs still sat beside ancient communication consoles. A military jacket hung from the back of a chair, now covered in dust. For a brief moment, the bunker didn't feel abandoned. It felt interrupted. I slowly approached one of the desks. Most of the documents had become unreadable, but one folder remained surprisingly well preserved inside a sealed plastic cover. Stamped across the front were the words, restricted below it, Facility B. 17 inside were dozens of faded reports. Many pages had stuck together from moisture, but a few sentences were still legible. Subject containment remained stable. The next page. Personnel report increasing auditory hallucinations. Another. Exposure exceeding 15 minutes is no longer recommended. The remaining text had been destroyed by water. I frowned. Containment? Hallucinations? This wasn't what I expected from an abandoned military bunker. I flipped through more pages. Almost every report ended the same way. Entire paragraphs had been blacked out. Someone had intentionally censored them. As I reached the final page, something fell onto the floor. A photograph, black and white. About 20 soldiers stood in front of the bunker entrance. They looked ordinary, until I counted them again. There were 20 faces, but 21 shadows. I blinked, looked closer. No, it wasn't a trick of the light. Every soldier stood facing the camera, except one shadow. The extra shadow faced the opposite direction, toward the bunker entrance. A chill spread through my entire body. I quickly shoved the photograph back into the folder. That's when I noticed something else. The dust on the command center floor. It wasn't undisturbed. Someone had walked between the desks, recently enough that the trail was still visible. One set of footprints, heavy boots, military style. They entered the room, but they never left. I followed them with my flashlight. The prints stopped in the exact center of the room. Nothing beyond them. No return path. No second exit. Just gone. I knelt beside the last footprint. The concrete beneath it looked darker than the surrounding floor, almost polished. as though countless boots had stood in exactly that spot. Without warning, click, the sound came directly behind me. I spun around. One of the old desk lamps had turned on. A weak yellow glow illuminated a single corner of the room. Impossible. The bunker had no electricity. I stared at the lamp. It flickered once, twice, then remained steady. A low electrical hum filled the room. One by one, other lights began switching on. Not all of them, just enough to create islands of dim yellow light across the command center. The fluorescent fixtures overhead remained dead. Only the desk lamps, one after another. Click, click, click. Every light that turned on revealed another empty chair, another abandoned workstation, another coffee cup. The room slowly transformed from a forgotten ruin into a place that looked as though people had just stepped away. Then, a radio crackled. The sound nearly made me drop my flashlight. Static burst through the speaker. Unit. More static. Respond. Silence. Then a man's voice. Weak. Distorted. Barely human. Don't. The transmission dissolved into loud interference. Then returned. Open. Static again. The lower level. The radio died. Every desk lamp shut off simultaneously. Darkness swallowed the room. My flashlight was now the only source of light. I turned toward the corridor. The path back looked much longer than before. Much darker. Then I heard it. Not footsteps. Breathing. Slow. Deep. Coming from room A09. The room I had deliberately avoided. The door, which had been slightly open only moments earlier, was now completely open, and something inside had just taken a slow breath. I should have run. Instead, I found myself staring into the darkness beyond room A09. The breathing continued. Slow, measured, like someone standing perfectly still, making no effort to hide their presence. I raised my flashlight. The beam cut through the doorway. Nothing. Just another concrete room. Metal shelves lined the walls, most of them collapsed beneath decades of rust. Wooden crates had rotted apart, scattering mold-covered paperwork across the floor. No person. No animal. Nothing that could possibly have been making that sound. Then, the breathing stopped. The silence that followed felt heavier than any noise. I took one cautious step backward. My boot scraped against a loose metal bolt. The tiny sound echoed far louder than it should have. And somewhere deeper inside the bunker, something answered. Bang. A heavy steel door slammed shut. Then another. Bang. Another. Bang. The echoes rolled through the underground corridors one after another, like dominoes falling somewhere beyond my sight. Every blast door inside the bunker was closing. One by one. The realization hit me instantly. The entrance. I sprinted back toward the staircase. My flashlight bounced wildly across the walls as I ran through the corridor. Dust filled the air with every step, making it difficult to breathe. The command center disappeared behind me. Room A09 remained open as I passed it. But this time, I saw someone standing inside, only for a fraction of a second. A silhouette, tall, completely motionless, its features hidden by darkness. I didn't stop to look. I kept running. The footsteps behind me began almost immediately. Not fast, not chasing, simply walking. Steady, patient. Each step echoed with the same rhythm I had heard earlier. One, pause. Another, pause. It wanted me to know it was following. I reached the blast door leading to the staircase. Still open. Relief flooded through me. I squeezed through the narrow gap and started climbing the concrete stairs two at a time. The cold air grew slightly warmer with every level. Above me, daylight was still visible through the partially opened entrance. I was almost out. 20 steps. 15. 10. 5. Then, the steel entrance door moved. At first only an inch. Then another. Slowly. Silently. Closing. No! I shouted as I lunged upward. The gap narrowed. Sunlight became a thin strip. I threw myself toward it with everything I had. My shoulder slammed against the steel. For one terrifying second, I thought I wasn't going to make it. Then the door stopped, only a few inches from closing completely, as though something on the other side had decided to let me leave. I forced myself through the opening and collapsed onto the forest floor, gasping for air. Behind me, the bunker door shut on its own. The sound echoed through the trees before the forest returned to complete silence. I lay there for several minutes before finally standing. The sky had turned orange. Sunset, but that didn't make sense. I had entered the bunker shortly after 3 in the afternoon. At most, I had spent 30 or 40 minutes underground. Yet my phone displayed 8:47 p.m. More than 5 hours had disappeared. There were no missed calls, no notifications, no explanation. I hurried back through the forest, following the GPS track I had recorded during the hike. Except, the trail wasn't there anymore. According to my phone, I was walking directly over it. In reality, there was nothing but dense trees. The path I had used earlier had vanished. Panic set in. I wandered for nearly an hour before finally spotting a gravel road. A park ranger found me sitting beside it, exhausted and covered in dust. He asked where I had come from. I pointed toward the forest. I found an old military bunker. The ranger's expression changed immediately. What bunker? The one behind the ridge. The entrance is hidden under vines. He stared at me for several seconds before quietly shaking his head. There hasn't been a bunker there for over 30 years. I frowned. What are you talking about? I just came from it. He looked genuinely unsettled. My father worked on the demolition crew. They sealed every entrance with reinforced concrete. There isn't anything left. I laughed nervously. I was literally inside it. Without another word, he drove me to the ranger station. The next morning, 2 forestry officers agreed to accompany me back to the location. I led them using the GPS coordinates saved on my phone. We found the ridge, the trees, the rocks. Everything matched. Everything, except the bunker. There was only a solid cliff covered in moss. No steel door, no concrete staircase, no military markings, nothing. One of the officers even tapped the rock with a hammer. Solid stone. No hollow sound. No hidden chamber. I checked my phone again. The GPS log clearly showed that I had stopped at that exact location for more than 5 hours. According to the map, I had never moved. The officers assumed my phone had malfunctioned. Eventually they left. I remained behind for one last look. That's when I noticed it, half buried beneath a patch of dead leaves. A black and white photograph. The same one I had picked up inside the bunker. 20 soldiers, standing in front of the entrance. 20 faces. 21 shadows. This time, however, the extra shadow was no longer facing the bunker. It was facing the camera, and in the lower right corner of the photograph, standing just outside the group, was another person, covered in dust, holding a flashlight, wearing the exact same hiking jacket I had on that day. I don't hike anymore, not because I'm afraid of getting lost, but because every few months, usually just before sunrise, my phone receives a notification. No sender. No phone number, only a single attachment, a black and white photograph. Every new picture shows the soldiers standing in the same place. Every new picture has one more shadow than the last. And in every photograph, I'm standing a little closer to the entrance of Bunker B-17.